My ex lied about having cancer to keep me paying her rent. Now she's exposed, jobless, and everyone she manipulated finally knows the truth. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and for the longest time, I thought my relationship with Emily was everything I ever wanted. We met at a bar one night. She was sitting at the corner, laughing with her friends, a glass of wine in hand. When our eyes met, it felt like everything else just faded into the background. She had that smile, you know? The kind that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the one. We started dating shortly after. At first, it was perfect. I was a guy who worked hard long hours at the office, taking on extra shifts to make sure I could afford the things we needed. And Emily, she was everything I could have dreamed of. Beautiful, kind, supportive. We'd spend weekends together watching movies in our small apartment, cooking dinner, talking about our plans for the future. She'd tell me how lucky she was to have someone who cared so much, and I'd believe it. I remember one evening, sitting on the couch, looking at her while she was scrolling through her phone. Her hair was messy. She was in my old, oversized hoodie, but it was the most comfortable, intimate feeling I'd ever had. It felt like we were a team, me working, her handling things at home. I thought this was it, the start of something real. But then slowly, I began to notice little things. Emily always seemed to need more from me. There were times I'd come home exhausted, and she'd ask for help with things I didn't even know needed help. Or sometimes I'd hear her talking on the phone with friends, but her words would be quieter when I walked in. It didn't seem like much at first, just little moments where I'd feel a twinge of unease, but I pushed it aside, telling myself that every relationship had its quirks. After all, we had a future ahead, right? We were in this together. Or so I thought. The tension, though, was there, just under the surface. Something I couldn't quite grasp, but felt deep in my gut. I'm not sure when it started exactly, but one day it hit me. Something wasn't right. It wasn't a big moment, no dramatic argument or tearful confession. It was just a feeling, a shift. Emily's smile started to feel less genuine, like she was playing a part. And the more I worked, the more I noticed how little I was really seeing her. I'd come home late, and she'd be there, in the same spot on the couch, phone in hand. But her eyes weren't really on me. She'd smile when I walked in, but there was a distance behind it, like she was trying to convince herself of something. It wasn't even the small stuff at first. It was the way she started acting like she needed constant reassurance. I'd be halfway through dinner, telling her about a project at work, and she'd suddenly ask, "Do you think I'm doing enough for us?" I'd blink, confused, because she was always so put together, always so perfect. "What do you mean?" I'd ask, my voice tight from the stress of the day. She'd shrugged, eyes downcast. "I don't know, just sometimes I feel like I'm not enough." I didn't know what to do with that. "Of course," I reassured her. I told her she was more than enough. She always had been. But after those moments, the unease grew. The tension shifted from subtle to undeniable, and then the financial pressure started building. Emily had always been careful with money, or at least that's what I thought. But as time passed, she began mentioning things like needing extra cash for little things, her emergency fund, a few more groceries than usual, a new jacket here and there. I didn't think much of it at first. We had some savings, and I made enough to cover everything. But soon, those little requests became bigger. "Can you pay my rent this month? I'm a little tight on money." That was the first time she asked, and like a fool, I said yes. I was happy to do it. I told myself that couples help each other, right? That was normal. But then it happened again, and again, and each time it was just a little more. I remember thinking, how did I not see this coming? The turning point came one evening, after I'd come home from work, exhausted as usual. Emily was sitting on the couch, wrapped up in one of my old hoodies, her legs pulled up to her chest. Her eyes were puffy, and for the first time in months, she didn't smile when I walked in. The air felt heavy. She didn't even bother pretending she was fine. "Hey," I said, setting my bag down. "How was your day?" She didn't respond immediately, and when she finally looked up at me, her eyes were filled with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe. She bit her lip, almost like she was trying to hold back tears. And that's when she dropped the bomb. "I went to the doctor today," she said, voice trembling. "I think I have cancer." I froze. The words hung in the air, and I just stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. My mind raced cancer. I had no idea how to react. I thought she was joking at first, but the look in her eyes told me it was anything but cancer. I repeated, my voice shaking. Emily, are you serious? She nodded, tears beginning to fill her eyes. They think it's just early stages, but I need to get more tests done. I didn't want to tell you this way, but I didn't know who else to talk to. My heart sank. I could barely breathe, let alone think straight. She was everything to me, and the idea of her being sick, possibly dying, shook me to my core. I pulled her into my arms, trying to comfort her, even though I had no idea what to say. She clung to me tightly, whispering over and over how scared she was. And in that moment, all I could think was, I'll do whatever it takes to help her. I don't even know how long we sat there like that, her in my arms, both of us crying, the weight of her words sinking in. I told her I'd be there for her, that I would do anything, and I meant it. But somewhere, deep down, there was this gnawing feeling, a tiny voice in the back of my head asking, is this really happening? In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into helping Emily like I'd never done before. Work became a blur as I started taking on extra shifts just to keep up with the mounting expenses. I paid for her doctor's visits, treatments, and anything else she needed. If she needed a ride to the hospital, I was there, no questions asked. I even started rearranging my entire schedule to be at her side, the hospital, at home, wherever she needed me. And all the while, Emily seemed more fragile. Her cancer treatments drained her, or so she said. I'd catch her wiping away tears, always making sure they didn't fall in front of me. She'd tell me she didn't want me to see her as weak, but I could tell it was taking a toll. Her hair began to thin just a little at first, then more over time. The dark circles under her eyes grew. I'd wake up at night to find her sitting on the edge of the bed, staring into space, her hands trembling. There were moments where I'd ask her how she was feeling. Really? And she'd just smile faintly and say, I'm fine. I'm just tired. But it didn't feel right. I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. I didn't want to admit it, but I was starting to feel like I was losing her. And yet, I kept pushing myself harder to make sure I could fix everything for her. One evening, she asked if I could pick up her prescription from the pharmacy. I was already running on fumes, but of course, I agreed. I stopped by the pharmacy on my way home from work, but when I arrived, I overheard the pharmacy tech talking about a patient who had just come in for a refill. The name sounded familiar, Emily's name. But the odd thing was, I didn't recognize the medication. It was a name I hadn't heard before. It didn't sound like anything related to cancer treatment. I stood there for a moment, just staring at the bottle in my hand, the tension creeping up my spine. I pushed it out of my mind, chalking it up to my exhaustion, but deep down, the doubt began to fester. Was I being played? A few days after the pharmacy incident, my suspicions began to gnaw at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but I tried to bury it. Emily needed me. I couldn't let her down. But the more I looked at those fake smiles, the way she'd cling to me for comfort even when I could tell her thoughts were elsewhere, the more the doubt grew. One night, I decided to do something I should have done much earlier. I searched through Emily's things, her phone, her medical papers, anything that could give me some kind of solid answer. I wasn't proud of it, but the nagging suspicion that something was off was eating me alive. I found her phone in the drawer, hidden under a stack of papers. My heart pounded as I unlocked it, scanning her messages. At first, it seemed normal texts between her and her friends, casual chats about TV shows, plans for the weekend. But then, I found something that made my stomach drop. A conversation with her best friend, Caitlin. The messages were about her treatment, how Emily had just gotten the news that her cancer was in remission, that she was finally done with chemo. My mind raced, trying to piece it together. I scrolled through the rest of their conversation, my pulse quickening as I read. There was no mention of any tests or recent doctor visits. No discussions of cancer at all. Just plans to celebrate getting through the worst of it. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. What the hell was going on? My mind scrambled for an explanation, but there was no denying it. Emily had been lying to Mia about everything. I confronted her that night, my voice cold and sharp. Emily, what is this? Why would you tell me you have cancer when you clearly don't? She froze, her eyes wide with shock, but her lips curled into that same practiced smile, the one that had always reassured me before, but now made my blood run cold. She stuttered, her breath catching in her throat. I can explain, but her words didn't matter anymore. My whole world had just been ripped apart in a single moment. And as she sat there, trying to explain herself, I realized how much I'd been played. I had nothing left but the truth, and that truth was a knife to my chest. The days that followed the confrontation were a blur of anger, confusion, and betrayal. Emily tried to explain herself over and over, but no matter what she said, it didn't change the fact that she had lied to me. The worst part wasn't the lie itself, but how deeply I had invested myself in her. All the sacrifices, the endless hours of work, the money I poured into her so-called treatments, it had all been for nothing. She sat there, crying, begging for my forgiveness, telling me she didn't know why she did it, that she was scared, and that she didn't want to lose me. But the words felt hollow. I couldn't even look at her without feeling like I had been a fool for so long. "I never wanted to hurt you," she kept saying, her voice breaking. I didn't know how to ask for help. I thought if I told you I was sick, you'd take care of me. I thought you'd love me more if I was ... vulnerable. Her words were the kind of manipulation I had never seen coming. She wasn't just playing a role, she was playing on my deepest fears, my need to feel needed. And it had worked. For months, I had been giving, always pouring from an empty cup. All because she made me believe she was sick and I was the only one who could save her. But it wasn't just the emotional toll. The financial drain was suffocating. I had dipped into savings, maxed out credit cards, taken out personal loans, all to keep up with her demands. And for what? I hadn't seen a single ounce of gratitude, just more requests, more pressure to do more, to give more. At first, I had been happy to help, but now, with the truth in front of me, I felt nothing but resentment. I was drowning, and she was standing on the sidelines, pretending to care while pulling me under. I had believed every word she said. I had believed in her, in us. But now, it was clear that I had been nothing more than a means to an end, a paycheck. The worst part was the guilt of not seeing it sooner, of letting myself get so lost in her lies. I kept asking myself, how could I have been so blind? One night, I sat alone in our living room, the place that had once felt like home, now a prison. I stared at the empty space on the couch, where Emily had been sitting just hours before, her tears still fresh in my mind. The silence was suffocating, and I realized, it wasn't just heartbroken. I was broken. I had to face the fact that I wasn't just mourning a relationship. I was mourning my own and at that moment, I knew I had to make a choice. I had to walk away. But the idea of leaving her, after everything, felt like a betrayal to the person I thought she was. I spent the whole night tossing and turning, torn between anger and heartbreak. And just when I thought I had made my decision, Emily came to me again. With that same sad look in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I swear I'll change." But I had already heard those words too many times. I stood up, feeling the weight of the moment press down on me. I couldn't let her manipulate me any longer. "I can't do this anymore, Emily," I said, my voice steady. "You've drained me emotionally, financially, and mentally. I can't give any more. I'm done," and that was it. That was when I realized that the hardest part wasn't leaving her, it was leaving myself behind. I thought walking away would be the hardest part, but in reality, it was what came after that nearly destroyed me. Once Emily was out of the apartment, once the silence settled in, I found myself utterly alone, and I had never felt so empty in my life. The apartment, once filled with her laughter and the soft hum of her presence, now felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in on me. The echo of my own thoughts was all I could hear. The first few days were the worst. I didn't sleep, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, her tear-streaked cheeks, her pleading eyes. I kept replaying everything in my head, over and over. The lies, the manipulation, the endless excuses. And the worst part was that I still loved her, even after everything. But the reality hit hard. I had no idea how bad things had gotten until I was standing in the wreckage of it all. I was financially drained. Everything I'd worked for was gone. The money I'd borrowed, the loans I'd taken out to cover her treatments, the credit card bills that now seemed like an insurmountable mountain. I couldn't even make the minimum payments. I was suffocating in debt, and I had no idea how to dig myself out. And emotionally, I felt like I had no self left. Every ounce of love, trust, and respect I'd had for myself had been drained by her lies. I didn't recognize the person I saw in the mirror anymore. The person who had been so sure, so confident, was gone. All I could see was a shell of the man who had let himself be manipulated. I was angry at her, at myself, but mostly I was angry at the version of me who had allowed it all to happen. There were moments when I couldn't even bring myself to leave the apartment. I'd sit on the couch, staring blankly at the wall, wondering how I let it get this far. I didn't have the energy to fight. I didn't even know where to begin. One night, I went to grab a drink at a bar, just to escape the noise in my head. I didn't even want to talk to anyone, but I ended up sitting next to an old friend of mine, Tom, someone I hadn't seen in years. He recognized me right away and asked what had happened. And for the first time, I let it all out. The anger, the shame, the betrayal. I told him everything. "I don't even know who I am anymore," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, the weight of the words almost suffocating. She took everything, my time, my money, myself. I thought I was helping her, but I just let her destroy me. Tom sat there, listening without judgment, but when I finished, he looked at me like I was a stranger. "You know what you need to do, right?" I shook my head, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "You need to stop feeling sorry for yourself. She's not the problem anymore. You are. You let her break you. You let her control you." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, but they were the truth. I had been letting her control everything. My time, my decisions, my self-worth. I had let myself drown in her lies, and now I had to pull myself out. And in that moment, I realized the worst part wasn't just the lies. It wasn't the money, the heartbreak, or the manipulation. The worst part was how little I had fought for myself. I had let her make me believe I was nothing without her. I had let myself become the victim. But that night, something inside me shifted. It wasn't an instant fix. It wasn't some grand epiphany, but it was the first step. I wasn't going to let myself sink any lower. I wasn't going to let her or anyone have that power over me anymore. I had hit rock bottom. But for the first time in a long while, I could see the tiniest glimmer of a way out. The days after that conversation with Tom weren't easy. In fact, they were some of the hardest. But something in me had started to shift. I still had a long way to go, but I was no longer willing to let Emily's manipulation control me. I decided to take the next step to find out the full extent of the lies she had told. To get the truth for myself, no matter how painful it might be, I started going through everything. The medical bills I'd paid for, the appointments I had driven her to, the messages and emails I had kept just to stay on top of things. The truth was buried in every corner of my life with her, and I was determined to dig it out. One afternoon, while sifting through a drawer full of old receipts, I found a letter tucked behind a pile of papers. It was from a hospital I didn't recognize, and the date on it was recent, far too recent for someone who'd supposedly been undergoing cancer treatment. My heart raced as I opened it and began to read. It was a financial statement, not for chemotherapy, not for medical treatments at all, but for something entirely different, a cosmetic procedure. Emily had been getting Botox injections every few months for the last year, long after she had supposedly been diagnosed with cancer. My stomach dropped. It felt like the world was collapsing in on me again, only this time the weight was suffocating. I kept reading, my hands shaking, until I found more receipts, grocery bills, salon charges, and even travel expenses, all from the time when she had supposedly been too ill to leave the couch. She had been living a lie, all while I was busting my ass to support her. I couldn't believe it. How could someone I loved so deeply be capable of this? I went through the rest of the pile, and each new discovery felt like another punch to the gut. The hospital visits, she had said, were for chemotherapy. They were actually routine checkups. The medications she had sworn were cancer treatments. They were painkillers prescribed for a minor back injury she had been hiding from me. My heart felt like it was being crushed under the weight of it all. Emily had been lying to me for months, no, for years. She had manipulated me, used my love and trust as a weapon to get everything she wanted, and I had fallen for it. The worst part, I still had feelings for her. I was still angry, yes, but there was also this aching emptiness in my chest. I wanted to scream, but I didn't even know who I was angry at anymore. Myself, both. I stared at the receipts, the evidence of her lies scattered across the table in front of me, and felt the tears welling up. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't keep letting her have this power over me. But I also knew that confronting her now would only bring more lies, more manipulation. I needed to do something that would finally break the cycle. But I didn't know what that something was yet. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living this way. And as I sat there, staring at the truth laid out in front of me, the one thing I did know was that I wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not anymore. It didn't take long for me to realize that. Confronting Emily with everything I had learned would be a waste of time. I knew her too well by now. She would deny it, play the victim again, and somehow twist the narrative to make me feel like I was the one who was wrong. But I was done. I needed something bigger, something that would expose her for what she really was. Not just to me, but to everyone she'd manipulated. The first person I reached out to was Caitlin, Emily's best friend. I had never had any issues with her, and I figured if anyone could help me get the truth out, it would be her. The conversation was uncomfortable at first. I didn't want to seem like a guy who was just bitter and desperate for answers, but I also couldn't keep this to myself any longer. Caitlin, I need to talk to you about something. It's about Emily, I started, my voice low. She hesitated on the other end of the line. What's going on? Is she okay? I took a deep breath, knowing I was about to drop a bombshell. No, Caitlin, she's been lying to all of us. About her health, about the cancer, everything she told me was a lie. I've got the receipts. I know everything. There was a long silence on the line before she finally spoke. What are you talking about? She's been really sick. She never had cancer, I interrupted, feeling a surge of anger rise. She faked it. I've got proof, Caitlin. I've seen the receipts. The hospital visits, the medications, the treatments. It's all been a lie. I could almost hear her take a sharp breath. No, no, that can't be right. I've seen her struggle. She's been in pain, I exhaled, frustration building. She's been manipulating you, Caitlin. All of us. She's been playing the victim, making me feel like I had to save her. All she wanted was money, attention, and control. And it worked. For months, I gave everything to her, my time, my money, my energy, and I had no idea it was all a scam. I could feel the shift in her tone, like the weight of the truth was starting to sink in. But why? Why would she do that? Because she's a narcissist, I said, the words tasting bitter as they left my mouth. She thrives on manipulation. She's done this before, with other people. And I was just the latest victim. There was a long pause, and for the first time I could hear the uncertainty in Caitlin's voice. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I replied. But I need you to know what kind of person she really is. And I'm not the only one she's done this to. She's been using people for years. Caitlin. By the time we hung up, I could hear the tremor in Caitlin's voice. She was shaken, and I knew she was going to confront Emily. I just didn't know when or how it would play out. But I also knew that things were about to blow up. Emily's world was about to come crashing down, and I was finally ready to watch it happen. The next day, I sent an email to everyone in her life, her family, friends, even some of the exes I'd managed to find. I gave them everything. Screenshots of her lies, receipts, and medical documents showing the truth about her cancer treatments. I knew it wasn't enough to just confront Emily. She needed to be exposed completely. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, heart pounding. This was it. No more hiding. No more being manipulated. The moment of truth had arrived, and I wasn't just taking her down. I was taking back my life. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. A few hours after sending that email, my phone started buzzing. First came the texts from friends, some confused, some angry, others just completely shocked. Emily's family was the first to call. I didn't answer. I wasn't sure what to say. I didn't want to hear their excuses or see their attempts to defend her, but I knew I had done the right thing. Then, about an hour later, I got a message from Caitlin. I could tell she'd been crying by the way her words came through broken, scattered, almost like she was still in shock. I don't know what to say. She's furious. She said you were lying, that you were trying to ruin her life, but I just saw everything. The receipts, the texts, it's all true, isn't it? I typed back, my fingers shaking, but not from fear, no. Now it was just a rush of relief. Yes, it's all true. She's been lying to everyone. She's been using us all for months. For years. She's done it before. And I was just the latest fool. Caitlin didn't reply right away. I imagined her sitting there, rereading the messages, trying to reconcile everything she had known about Emily with the truth, now staring her in the face. I knew it wasn't easy for her. She had been Emily's closest ally, and I knew she had to be devastated. I spent the rest of the night pacing in the living room, unable to sit still. The powerlessness I'd felt just a few days ago was slowly being replaced with something else, something stronger. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about taking my life back, about clearing the fog she had created around me. I needed to feel like I was in control again. As the evening wore on, more calls came through. Her parents, first her mom, then her dad. Both were angry. They wanted to know why I had gone public with everything. They demanded to know why I didn't give Emily a chance to explain herself. But the truth was, there was nothing left to explain, and I had given her countless chances to come clean. She had lied to me, manipulated me for months, and I couldn't just let it go. The real bombshell came the next morning when Emily finally called me. I saw her name flash on my screen, and my heart dropped into my stomach. Part of me wanted to ignore the call, but I knew this was the confrontation I had been waiting for. The moment where she would try to shift the blame, manipulate me one last time. I answered, trying to sound calm. "What do you want?" She was frantic on the other end, her voice rising in desperation. "You don't know what you're doing. You've ruined everything. I was just trying to survive, trying to get through all of this, and you destroyed me." I laughed, the bitterness in my voice so sharp it surprised me. "You destroyed yourself, Emily. All I did was expose the truth. You've been lying to me, using me. I'm not going to let you do that anymore," she screamed into the phone. "You think this is over? You think you've won? You're nothing without me. You always were." I felt a surge of anger, but also something else, something I hadn't felt in so long: freedom. I had been chained to her lies for so long, but now I was free. Free from her manipulation. Free from the person I thought I was. And most importantly, free from the weight of her cruelty. "I'm done with you," I said quietly, the words finally feeling like they meant something. "You don't get to control me anymore." And just like that, the line went silent. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. The storm wasn't over, not yet, but I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. I knew the damage had been done. Her reputation was in shambles, her lies had been exposed, and there was no coming back from this. But for me, it was the beginning of something new. Something I could control. I walked away from the phone, the weight on my shoulders lighter than it had been in what felt like forever. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was justice, and it was mine. The aftermath hit Emily like a freight train. By the time the morning rolled around, the fallout had already begun to ripple through her life. Her family had tried to shield her from the reality of her actions, but it didn't matter. They couldn't protect her anymore. Everyone she had ever manipulated, her friends, her coworkers, even the people she had called family, were starting to distance themselves from her. The truth had come out, and there was no way to hide behind her lies anymore. It wasn't just her personal relationships that were falling apart. Emily's job, the one she had been so proud of, had fired her within hours of her coworkers finding out. Word had spread fast. She was caught in a web of her own making, and no one was going to protect her from the consequences anymore. She had built her entire life on deception, and now it was crumbling beneath her feet. By the time I heard about her being let go, I wasn't surprised. But still, a part of me felt something I hadn't expected: relief. It was a bitter kind of relief, but it was still relief. Emily had built a life of manipulation, and now she was facing the consequences. The same consequences she had avoided for years. But there was something else too. I couldn't deny that a small part of me still felt sorry for her. Maybe it was the person I used to be, the one who believed in saving people, in fixing things. Maybe it was the remnants of the love I had once felt for her, but that part of me was fading, and fast. I was sitting at home, trying to focus on the task at hand, sorting through the mess I had inherited from my time with Emily, when my phone rang again. I looked at the screen and saw her name flash across it. A jolt ran through me. Part of me wanted to ignore it. I didn't owe her another word, another explanation. But I answered anyway. "Emily," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "What do you want?" She was frantic on the other end, her voice shaking with what I could only describe as a mix of panic and desperation. "I'm sorry, okay. I didn't mean for things to get this out of control. You have to understand, I was just trying to get by. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant to hurt anyone. I felt my heart harden. I'd heard these words before. This was the same act, the same desperation she had used when I first found out about her lies. She was trying to manipulate me again, to twist the situation to make me feel sorry for her. You've done nothing but hurt people. Emily, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. And you never took responsibility for any of it. Not once. You used me, you used everyone around you, and now you're paying the price. You don't get to make me feel guilty for that. She started crying on the other end, the sounds of her sobs grating on my nerves. Please, don't say that. I know I messed up. But I love you. You're the only one who ever really cared. I'm sorry. I can't lose you too. It was the same story, the same manipulation. She was trying to cling to anything she could. But this time, I wasn't buying it. I wasn't the same person I had been when we first met. I wasn't the fool who believed her every word. I had learned the hard way, and I wasn't about to make the same mistake again. You don't get to use me anymore, Emily, I said, my voice firm, almost final. You don't get to take anything from me ever again. I'm done. I ended the call and sat there in silence, the weight of the moment settling over me. There were no more lies, no more manipulation, no more pretending that everything was going to be okay. The last ties I had to her, to that broken version of myself, were officially severed. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know how I would rebuild after everything that had happened. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let her destroy me anymore, for the first time in a long while. I felt the tiniest spark of something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. It's funny how, after everything, the hardest part wasn't the betrayal, the lies, or even the emotional drain. The hardest part was learning to rebuild not just my life, but myself. When you give so much of yourself to someone, when you pour your heart into them, believing they're worth every sacrifice, you lose pieces of who you are along the way. And when that person rips it all away, leaving you with nothing but the wreckage of your trust, it's like you're starting from scratch. But somehow, I knew that this time, I had to rebuild stronger. I wasn't the same person who had let Emily control my life. I wasn't the same man who had blindly given her everything without questioning it. And even though the scars from what she did to me would always be there, they weren't going to define me anymore. The first step in healing came when I finally let myself grieve. Not for Emily, not for the relationship, but for myself. I cried not just for what she had done, but for the part of me I had lost in the process. It felt like shedding a layer of skin, something I didn't know I needed to do until I finally did. I cried for the fool I had been, for the trust I had given so icily, for the love I thought I deserved. But with each tear that fell, I could feel myself getting closer to something I hadn't had in so long. Peace. It wasn't all smooth sailing, of course. The debt Emily had left me in didn't disappear overnight. I had to work through the financial mess she had dragged me into, taking on extra work, cutting back on things I had once taken for granted. There were days I felt like I would never fully escape the weight of it all. But even in those moments of doubt, I reminded myself of how far I had come. One of the biggest changes was how I started to value myself again. I began taking care of my body, eating better, working out, rediscovering hobbies I'd forgotten about when Emily's needs had consumed every moment of my life. I started reconnecting with friends I hadn't spoken to in months, laughing with people who had been there for me when I couldn't see the truth. It wasn't about getting back to where I had been. I wasn't trying to fix the past. I was learning to let go of the version of me that Emily had taken advantage of, and in doing that, I started to reclaim the pieces of myself I had lost. And then there was the moment when Emily reached out again. She sent a message, a simple hey, with an apology that felt like it came straight out of a script she had used on everyone before me. But this time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the tightness in my chest I had grown used to when I heard from her. I didn't even feel pity. I felt ... nothing. And that was the best feeling I could have asked for. I replied, not with venom, but with finality. I've moved on. You don't get to manipulate me anymore. You don't get to hurt me. Take care of yourself. And that was it. The end of a chapter. Not just of my relationship with her, but of a life I had lived in the shadows of her lies. I closed my phone, stood up, and walked out of the apartment. The sun was setting, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight lifting. I had been broken, But now I was whole again. And this time, I was doing it for me. I wasn't the man I was when I met Emily. I was stronger. I was smarter. And most importantly, I was free. And with that freedom, I knew the future was mine to shape.